If you know the song Wreck of the Old 97, then you've heard a dramatized, mostly fictional account of a runaway train. While the engineer got all the tragic glory in the song, there were 18 souls on board the train, mostly railroad post office mail clerks. During my August 2024 trip to Charlottesville, Virginia, I visited 2 graves of mail clerks who survived the wreck. Only after I got home did I realize I missed seeing the grave of wreck survivor Frank Brooks, who was buried in the same cemetery as one I visited, and that he used to live at a house 4 doors down from the bed and breakfast I stayed at. The wreck of Old 97 occurred on 27 September 1903. A total of 8 men survived to see the sun rise the next day, one of them passing away on October 6th. Of the 7 long-term survivors, I first visited the grave of Napoleon Cloren Maupin in Oakwood Cemetery, walking distance away from my B&B. Also in this family plot is his wife, mother, father, infant child, and a daughter who lived to be 104 years old. Cloren, as familiar company called him, had been in 2 wrecks in as many months, walking away unhurt from one on 28 July 1903 involving train number 38. He narrowly avoided being crushed underneath the broken-up mail car he was riding in during Wreck of Old 97, buried under the wreckage of another wooden car and a more intact steel car on top. He was aware the wreck had caught fire, and men tried to free him, but Cloren was literally pinned inside the rubble by a screw through the nail of his second finger. He asked rescuers for a pocket knife so he could sever his finger to free himself, but they were able to get him out before having to fulfill their promise to give him one. After 2 surely frightening hours, he was finally free of the debris. The 23-year-old would spend a week in the home for the sick in Danville receiving care for his wounds and a broken collarbone, but would be off work and in hospital over the next 6 months with blood poisoning. He'd get married in 1904 and raise a family. Instead of returning to the train run, he'd spend the rest of his career working in the relative safety of the Charlottesville Station as transfer clerk. I say relative because his grandson relayed a story about him being hit from behind by a train arriving in the station. Hey, this guy survived an unplanned dive off of a 75-foot high trestle. He just went right back to work and hopefully was a little more cautious from then on. It was truly surreal standing so close to an old 97 survivor and seeing his name engraved in stone. I'm told he was a smart and very kind man, loved even by the wild birds that would visit him in his garden. I hope someday to learn even more about who he was and what amazing stories he once told about the most unplanned adventure of his life. On the drive home, I detoured to Culpeper, Virginia to visit another survivor's grave. Charles Everett Reams was in the same mail car as Cloren, but instead of being pinned inside, he was catapulted through the side of the car as it broke apart, strangely giving him a better chance of survival than those caught in the rubble. He'd survive Old 97 with a back injury keeping him off work for 5 months, but he'd ultimately go back and finish out his career as mail clerk. When I located his grave marker in the Masonic Cemetery, it was covered by crabgrass. I don't live close enough to keep it cleared, but hopefully someone else will. I cleared it, of course, before I left. He has a son of the same name, a junior, who is buried in more plain sight around the family plot, whereas Charles Sr. is behind the headstone. I don't know as much about Mr. Reams as no living relative with first-hand knowledge of family lore has yet come forward. The reason I'm passionate about telling the stories of the mail clerks on board Old 97 is because they were real living people just like us. They had a harrowing experience and probably psychological scars, but they persevered. Their stories deserve to be told and their lives remembered. The famous song is not about them. It's not even really the truth of the matter. I don't want these brave souls, survivors or otherwise, to go forgotten because they were unfortunate victims with lives and loved ones around them, and who were hurt or killed just trying to do their jobs. I think about them every time I go out on the train crew with Black River and Western. We have a 45-foot high trestle, we have raised rail beds, and while we haven't had a derailment technically since 1866, but we run much slower on even terrain, it still does not come without the slightest risk. And I don't dwell on the what-ifs, but I do think about these brave men and that I serve on a railroad even though in a different capacity. I tip my hat and dedicate my service to Old 97's clerks and crew, and hope to show the world a little bit more about who they were and how they endured.